Hello and welcome to the Rupeeting podcast. My name is Ayush and we have Sagar back on the podcast this evening. Say hello, Sagar.
Hello, hello.
Before we begin, we'd just like to give the age-old disclaimer that none of the securities that we mentioned during the course of this podcast are recommendatory in any manner, and all of the information we provide in terms of a forward-looking approach is just supposed to be educational content. So yeah, now that that's out of the way, the topic for today is related to the sun.
Whose son are we talking about?
The galactic one.
Yes, so
Yeah.
no, continue.
What
Don't
about the
wait.
sun?
The slag is
Oh, I thought you were going to say something. Okay.
no.
ठीक है, ठीक है. Cool. Yes. So the sun is the topic for today, and more importantly, the energy that it generates for us in a more efficient and supposedly cheaper manner in the future, solar power. And that's had quite a few years in the recent past because even though it just makes up about 5% of all the energy that we generate for electricity, it's grown at a 60% CAGR in like the past 5 years, which is great because it's outperformed every other source of electricity, whether it's oil, coal, uh, or the other renewable ones like wind and water energies. That's a pretty interesting statistic on the solar end.
But it's still so small, right? Like even after growing at 60% CAGR, that's when numbers are so
Yeah,
deceptive. Because there's such high growth, but if the base is small, it doesn't matter at all. So,
yeah,
despite
that's true.
this, it's how much would it be of total energy production?
About energy production, this is for electricity specifically. It's about 5%.
Electricity, yeah.
Yeah,
Ah,
5%.
yeah.
That's it.
But still, it's not the smallest, right? At 5%.
It's not. I think about I think nuclear power would be the smallest, and then I
Yeah.
think wind comes at a close second in terms of the renewable energy. With I think even wind growing at about a 20-30% CAGR in the past 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. So highest is still coal, followed by hydro,
yeah,
um,
yeah,
then wind. No, sorry, then solar, then wind, and then gas and nuclear.
yeah. So nuclear has
Wow.
been a constant, uh, very negligible amount for the past decade or two. But yeah, solar has really caught everyone's attention, not just in terms of the numbers in the electricity production, but in general, people are opting for a solar alternative in places where sun is in abundance. And I mean, in our country, we get 300 years of sunlight a year, which is quite the
Years,
resource to
300 years of
exploit.
300
300
days.
days in the year.
It will also reflect high growth because a lot of individual homes and um commercial buildings and residential buildings will also put up panels for their own usage, which goes
Yeah,
back into the grid if it's not utilized, right? I don't know if the split is available of how much is done by Gencos versus how much is thrown into the grid by random sources. Um, but I'm sure that must
right.
be also contributing to a natural capacity addition, which is not incurred by government initiatives or by government
Yeah,
actually getting their hands dirty. I mean, they do provide rebates and incentives
correct.
and stuff, but it's not like they're going and
Yeah,
installing capacity. It's a mix of private and government initiative.
absolutely. Yeah, so it's done the trick for sure. And speaking of just installations of panels and everything, I think just the installation bit is possibly around 5 to 10% of the total cost that goes into getting a solar panel onto your roof. And majority of that is obviously the module that comes with the solar panel.
Sorry, what is the other cost then? If it's
And
only five
that's
to ten
where,
percent,
so there's one bit about 5 to 10% for the designing and financing aspect of the solar panel. There's another 5 to 10% for, as we mentioned, installation. And then the rest of it is just the module itself.
Okay, that way, got it.
Yeah. 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 So yeah, there's a lot of science that goes into creating that module, and not a lot of people in India making those parts, but that's getting a push. And I think one of the top
Yeah.
contenders, or at least one of the more renowned ones in that mix, is Borosil Renewables, who do the little 2 to 4 millimeter thick glass that goes onto the entire panel, protecting everything that's inside it and trapping the heat for the solar energy to be generated. Pretty important segment.
Yeah, but what is the value of so if you take a solar module, how much cost would the glass take up? Because that doesn't seem like the most
Specifically,
important element, right? Because the cells will be the
hmm,
most important and I think the most high value,
primary. Yeah,
followed by probably
right.
the glass.
Yeah. I'm sure it's in that order, with the PV cell or the photovoltaic cell being of at least more than 50% of the entire module's cost, at least. It's quite an expensive endeavor. Hence,
Yeah,
the lack of players in India being able to manufacture it also. We'll
but
see.
solar modules, who manufactures those? Like the cells, forget the modules.
In India, I think a renowned player for that would be Adani Solar. They're doing a lot of the solar PV manufacturing. And
Hmm.
there's other players getting in, like uh, Renew Energy, Barvi, Vis, Vistar Solar, Tata Power. All of them are getting funding from the PLI scheme to do exactly this, to diversify the number of players that are able to manufacture the solar PV.
The cells.
Yeah, the sets.
But the glass scene is damn interesting. With like, I was very surprised by the fact that it's not only India, but
Yeah,
like globally, it's only two Chinese companies that control 97% of the market. That's
yeah,
insane.
it's in.
That kind of market share is just crazy.
Yeah, I think if you have to look at it from historical growth wise, uh, about 2010 is when, as we mentioned, Borosil Renewables earlier, set up the first and only solar glass plant in India back in 2010. And at the time, so one, let's say one of those plants would be worth
Hmm.
less than a gigawatt of solar power. But in terms of the
Hmm.
Chinese equivalent, they already had 10 gigawatts of solar module manufacturing then itself. And that grew by 10x over a decade. So we are vastly underperforming in terms of solar module manufacturing in India compared to Chinese.
Yeah. No, but also because it's not very difficult for China to put up like additional capacity that can cater to India, right? Because the Indian market is also so small right now. It's just about total capacity will be about 65 gigawatts. And I think I should highlight the math behind this, where 65 gigawatts. So
Yeah.
for every gigawatt, you need about 4,000 modules. 4,000, no? How much was the number?
4 million modules.
Sorry, 4 million modules. Are you sure 4 million?
Yeah. It's a lot. Yeah, yeah. So 1 gigawatt is about 3.9 something million panels.
Hmm. Wow. Yeah.
That's a lot, yeah. It's shocking.
And one module is we'll go deeper into the match. This can be a quiz of your hard work over the last week. Uh,
Oh God.
so yeah, so quiz
The-
time. Okay, now this is math
Hmm.
math plus solar power quiz.
Oh
Um,
no.
so so 1 gigawatt of solar power generation. How many
Yeah.
modules does it require?
Hmm. The number, I guess, would be based on the kilowatt hour of power it generates. So I think for 1 kilowatt hour, it's a different. Then next is three, and then it's six. So for each kilowatt hour of power generated, the number of modules will automatically multiply.
I don't know where you got this answer from. I can't even verify if it's right or wrong.
You only told me this.
Acha. And for one module of one solar module, how much solar glass is required?
Hmm. 1.6 square meter of solar glass.
Okay. And a 1.6 meter square meter solar glass typically would weigh how much?
It's about 20 kilos, but that's something that they want to reduce. But right now it's 20 kilos.
This is
That's
clearly
pretty,
scripted,
yeah.
the way you are answering everything correctly.
I'll mess up the cost. I'll mess up the cost. Don't worry. Chalo,
No, that's okay.
I'll understate it by or overstate it by a lot.
Okay. So typically then, uh, like it's capacity for solar glass production is calculated in both ways, right? In tons per
Yeah.
day, as well as
Hmm.
in
Yeah.
gigawatt. So Borosil Renewables
Yeah.
at 67 gigawatt of capacity. No, sorry,
Hmm.
67 is India ka total
Yeah.
generation, right? How much can Borosil
Hmm.
provide out of that? How much can Borosil provide solar glass for?
Okay. So let's say I'm taking my calculator out. They have about 1,100 tons per day of capacity.
Yeah.
That into gigawatt would result in about 7.5 gigawatts of capacity, which is like a 12% share of the production or generation that they can accommodate.
Yeah. Okay, but that's the wrong way of looking at it, right? Because next year, for example, this year's
Hmm.
capacity is
Yeah.
67 gigawatt. Next year, you won't add a full 67
Yeah.
gigawatt. There'll be growth on top of that, right? So the
Yeah.
projection
You'll
is that next year
incrementally
we'll
add
add,
12 or 13.
yeah,
Yeah.
so we'll add about 17 gigawatt of capacity in the next year. So out of the 17 gigawatt, um, Borosil can provide about 30% of it. That's the um
Hmm.
math that works out. Because 30%
Yeah.
is approximately 1100 tons per day, which is actually about
Tons
275,000
per
tons
day.
of solar glass. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. So with 1100, and it's able to provide only 35% of the total demand. The
Entire
rest of
demand.
it,
Yeah.
everything is China.
So there's a little tiny little startup that is working now in India, which gives about 100 tons per day as the metric. So it's almost negligible, but rest
That's
everything is
negligible,
from
right?
China.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
everything's from China.
And it's surprising how, like, China at a point, even when Borosil was the only manufacturer, obviously we had to depend on China. China had like an 80%
Yeah,
market share at that point, right? And from
right.
80%, the market share has fluctuated quite a bit because after 80, it has gone down to 65 now. Um, However,
Yeah,
that 65 uh, will actually bounce up to 75 next year, and that 75%
yeah,
will then come down to a 20% by FY27. So it's like a very
yeah. Because the
weird
domestic
chart where
power
it
will,
starts at, yeah, it starts
yeah,
at 80, goes down to 65, goes up to
hmm,
75, and then goes down to 20
yeah.
directly.
Then
So you want
all
to
the way, yeah,
talk about the story of one. Let's I think divide it phase
yeah,
wise, right? How we know how it reached 80. There was no capacity in India at that point in time. Borosil got its first plant
yeah,
in, and they whatever capacity they had, the rest of it was a deficit which China had obviously occupied. Um, but from
right,
80%, how did it come down to 65%? Uh, China's
yeah,
share, right?
yeah.
Yeah, let's start with that
Yeah,
phase.
that's quite an interesting story actually that you pointed it out. So as we mentioned, Chinese had captured about 80% of the market, and Borosil was the only other competitor from the Indian market to represent the solar glass space. Now, the thing with China being that 80% leader was because they were doing something a little shady. So, let's say, as we mentioned, if each square meter of glass is worth around about 450 bucks, and that's what Borosil was charging, let's say, prior to FY19 or prior to 2019, 2018. China used to come in and sell it at 380 rupees, which is about a 15% discount to any domestic player or the only domestic player in India. So automatically, a supplier would gravitate towards the cheaper price because quality was just about the same. And
Yeah,
hence
but
that sort
why
of
do you call
dumping
it
nature that they engaged in.
shady? Because, like, if
It's
they're able
unfair,
to
right?
produce at scale, no, I mean, if they're producing at scale,
Huh.
they are the market leaders globally. They
Yeah.
obviously have some
Hmm.
benefits in terms of raw material procurement, in terms of
Right.
efficiencies that are derived out of scale because of that kind of production. And then they have to
Yeah.
ship it out from China to India. So even despite that
Yeah.
transactional, sorry, that conveyance charge or transportation cost, they're able to do it cheaper. So I don't know if it's shady,
Yeah,
right? It's not like they're running losses to do it. They're still like profitable corporations that are operating uh,
sure.
globally. Uh, Shady because
Yeah,
it's not in India's favor, so it just naturally becomes
yeah,
shady.
exactly. Yeah, so technically it was just a test of their skill and just proving just
Sure,
how good they are at
that's just
manufacturing
China
in
being
general.
China at everything. So
China, exactly. Absolutely. And I think this wasn't just solar glass that they were mastering at. They had north of 80% market share in anything solar panel related, and all of it was being imported into India. So solar
hmm.
glasses was one part of the dominance that China showed. And then, of course, Borosil being the biggest player in India felt like it needed more of the pie, and there was no other way to beat Chinese manufacturing prowess other than basically complaining to the teacher. They went to something called a Director General of the under the Ministry of Commerce, and they filed a complaint that China is engaging in this sort of unfair trade mechanism, and they need to be charged duties on this behavior. And that duty ranged from about 300 rupees per ton of glass they exported to India, which is quite a hefty one considering the volume that was going in. And that this basically bridged that 15% discount, and now China is actually producing or selling at 488 rupees or 490 rupees, and then Borosil still remaining at the 450 rupees. So now Borosil became the cheaper player, and I think that did wonders for them, and not so much for China, where their market share reduced to the 65% you
No,
mentioned.
but that's the thing, right? I want to hold it there, and the important takeaway from this is that what they got, Borosil, what does it get out of this, right? One is that it created a
Yeah,
pricing floor for itself. Because whatever
yeah,
duties the government imposed onto Chinese players, that naturally becomes the floor, and and that floor is higher compared to what the earlier pricing was. So there is a pricing increase which kicks in,
exactly.
and that impacts revenue growth as well as profitability, and great for Borosil. But in terms of capacity, it maxes out at 35% because Borosil itself does not have the capacity to supply more than that.
Yeah,
So there's no point of
exactly.
curbing duties to or curbing imports to such a large extent because India just doesn't have the
Mm,
capacity to fulfill that kind of demand by itself. Right? So the
absolutely.
need for either China or for some other country or imports from anywhere else is currently present given the fact that solar capacity is growing at 60% CAGR. However, the glass capacity is not really growing. There's only one player. So
Yeah,
obviously that's something that doesn't seem too good for the market, uh, given that demand is exceeding local supply. And if the intent of
exactly.
duties is to protect local supply, there is no local supply to protect in the first place. So what are you trying to
Okay, I think
protect?
that's where they messed up. They
Who, the
went about it
government or
all wrong
Borosil?
in trying to. I mean, I think both Borosil in trying to push China off the board or thinking that it can even try to do that, and the government obliging because it may have been a little too soon to even go that sort of penetrative route of removing competition before we had something of value to provide, which wasn't the
Yeah, but
case.
that's I think there is realization of that at least from the government side now.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so, which brings us to the second phase, right, where the 65% share of China can now actually increase to 75%. So,
yeah,
you want to talk a little about how we're going reverse again from 80 to 65 and now 65 to back to
yeah.
75.
Yeah. So the thing with those duties that we mentioned earlier was, and which is why this uptick is happening again, is it had a timestamp on it of 5 years, and this was imposed about in 2017 end. In which case, the expiry of said duties was in August 2022, and since then, China's had to come back and is still selling at a discount again, not as much as it did before, because I think it's being vigilant of the fact that it could just have to pay those duties again, and there could be a lengthening of its sentence. But now it's charging about a 5% discount to whatever Borosil sells, and naturally everyone gravitated back to China. And now Borosil's market share reduced, Borosil's revenues were fairly okay, but profitability took a massive hit. All of it just, or at least partly because of this comeback that China has exhibited. And the government
Yeah.
doesn't seem to be wanting to apply those duties again.
Naturally, I mean, there's nothing to protect, right? And um,
Exactly.
like, I
There
think
still isn't anything to
the
protect.
other timing issue is also the fact that while Borosil earned all that money out of the duties having been imposed here, uh, it went and
Yeah.
acquired a company in Europe for solar glass
Yeah.
manufacturing. So
Yeah.
where there is visible demand supply mismatch in India, and you
Hmm.
could have deployed capacity in India, you go and acquire something in Europe that seems very stupid. That too, when you're going and asking the government for uh, protection of local industries or imposition of duties on foreign players just to protect local
Exactly.
industry, right? So
Not
obviously the
very make
government
in
is going
India
to
of
turn
them.
around and say, "Hey, bro, like you at least put capacity here first, right? Uh,
Exactly.
why am I supposed to
Exactly.
help you if you're going to make money here and go and buy something in Europe?" Uh, that doesn't seem
Exactly.
very rational. But I think what
Yeah.
it would have assumed there is that the duties will continue into eternity, and that it will have enough time to keep its market share afloat, and then probably add capacity aram se whenever at its ease, um, which it planned,
Right.
right? So the capital expenditure, at least that is predicted or forecasted for Borosil, is that it will be towards FY 26-27, where they'll add another 1,000
Yeah.
tons per day of capacity, which is double
TPT
of
of
what
yeah.
it is right now, right? But the thing is, there are two factors that come into play here, right? One is that your overall solar capacity from 67 gigawatt right now is actually going to go 3x by 27. So
Yeah.
again, you're at a losing end because your capacity is going 3x in terms of solar power generation, but in terms of solar glass manufacturing, Borosil alone is only increasing by double. So again, it's at a
By double.
losing state here. It's going to lose market share despite it being such a high growth market.
Yeah.
And the
That's true.
other thing, what's going to hurt real bad also is that the whole duty phase obviously would have made others also think that this is a super lucrative industry to be in because demand is exceeding supply, and plus foreign players are
Exactly.
under pressure. So let's all put capacity in India. Not everybody will say, "Na, hum bhi
That's what's
Europe mein jaake
happening.
kholenge abhi." So yeah. So what is the additional capacity coming in from the other players domestically? Let's not even talk about
Yeah.
China now.
So
So
there's a few actually, and that's little concerning. So there's players like Asahi India Glass, which is mainly into automotive glasses, but now they're getting into the solar glass space because of the reasons you mentioned. It looking, at least from the facade of it, a lucrative business to be in. So they're adding about 430 tons per day in the next 2 years. So by FY 25, it should be up and running. Then there's this
which will
company
still
called
be a
Triveni
quarter
Glass.
of
That's
what Borosil will have.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, correct. And of the total, it'll probably be 9 to 10%,
got it. Yeah.
like of the entire market at the end. Yeah. Then there's Triveni Glass, who's fighting for second place with about 840 tons per day, which is a sizable amount and possibly like a little bit of a threat to Borosil's capacity addition. Then there's
But
smaller
I don't see
companies like
any of it
Gold
if,
Plus
to
Glass
be
and
a
everything.
threat, right?
No,
Because if a
not right
market is
now.
growing 3x, and so there is space
Yeah,
for everybody, provided
yeah, that,
pricing is a commonality. Uh,
hmm.
yeah, and
Yeah. So I think that's what's yeah, that's about it. Then so basically from the current in the entire market, let's say there's about 1,100 tons per day or 1,200 tons per day of capacity right now. By FY 27,
yeah,
when all of these companies set up their furnaces, it'll reach about 3,700 tons per day, which is quite the jump in total. But
yeah.
as you mentioned earlier, Borosil is only growing by 2x out of that entire growth of the market, hence resulting
Yeah.
in a lesser share.
Hmm. So again, like at that point in time, again in FY 27, given whatever power supply India adds, um, of that
Yeah,
India's capacity with Borosil's addition plus the other four players coming in, we'll be able to probably still not take care of the entire demand that is there, despite so much capital expenditure happening, despite newer
yeah,
players coming in, and there'll still be room for China to play
absolutely.
with. And assuming that um, all Indian capacity is utilized, um, China will still have about 20% market share at that point in time. Because India will only
Yeah,
be able to cater to about
after
80%
all
of the
that.
total demand after all this, right?
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah,
so obviously it comes across as a market where, despite screwing up in terms of uh, timing of asking for duties on China, despite screwing up on improper capital allocation by buying something out in Europe when demand is here
Yeah.
on home turf.
It may
And
not be improper.
sure, I'm just saying it's not the most intuitive thing to do, right?
It's definitely not
Uh,
part of the whole Make in India thing.
yeah, yeah,
It's their own
yeah,
personal agenda that they're fulfilling there.
sure. And so, despite those two things, and despite the third one being that now you don't have enough money or plans to add capacity, and there is a 2 year, 3 year gap of no
Absolutely.
capacity addition, so you're losing out on market. So, despite these three
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
not the best decisions, um, Borosil still will,
Yeah.
with doubling its capacity, grow at a good 21%, 22% CAGR in terms of revenue over the next 4 years, right? So I think the market is
Yeah.
so amazing that even a company with not the best decisions is able to still maintain very high growth, with high visibility of growth, right? The
Yeah.
market offers not just opportunity but visibility of that number actually translating and coming into financials. Um,
Exactly.
so it's
True.
a, I think, great space to be in, great opportunity. And uh, despite all the dissing that we've done on Borosil, I think it's a great company from a financial performance standpoint over the next 4 years. uh, but
Yeah. Yeah.
the problem is that not every great company makes for a great stock. Right? Good companies can have bad stocks and bad companies can have good stocks, because it all
Yeah.
depends on the, wow, this is like full poster material. uh, because it's all, because it depends on the price, right? And the price determines whether the stock is, the entry price will determine whether the stock is good for you or not good for you. And
Right.
given Borosil's trajectory so far, um, it's been a great stock. But will it continue to be a great stock in the future?
Okay, you're stuck. Okay, you're back, I think. Will it what?
I'm saying, historically, because of the duties and because of how the performance has been, Borosil's
Yeah.
been a great stock so far, right?
Yeah.
Pioneer in the whole solar glass space in India, dominant market share, and despite all the dissing that we've done on it, it's uh, managed to grab a 35% market share, uh, which is commendable, and it has a clear, visible runway for growth over the next 4 years,
Yeah.
right? So great company, and so far it's been a great stock, but that does not necessarily mean that that trajectory will continue, right?
Yeah.
Given the fact that valuations are so heightened up or elevated now, given recent performance and events
Right.
that have led up to such a sharp increase in stock price.
Yeah. I think speaking of that, and I think the returns speak for themselves, at least in their whole growth phase, that the stock went up almost 12 times in value. So from like a 50 rupees, it went up 600 and 700 levels in the span of that 2019 to 2022 space. So if any of you thought of buying it at that time, you must have made a whole lot of money. But now it's again, since China has come back, and it's quite like aligning with the whole story. Where China left, stock went up 12 times. China came back, stock is now down 30% in 6 months. So that trajectory seems to be a little bit of a continuing story where the valuations are going to come back down to earth from flying too close to the sun. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that can continue till the time a couple of things happen, right? Where number one, and we clearly know that capacity addition is a little far away, so China will
Yeah.
continue getting market share. So there is going to be bad publicity around this. There is going to be market share loss for the next year or 2 years, or even for the next 4 years. There's going to be a
Right.
consistent market share loss, because even after this one, if even after Borosil adds capacity, there are 3 4 more players coming in. So
Exactly.
capacity loss, plus sorry, market share loss, plus, at least in the near term, China coming back,
Yeah.
and number three, clearly no government support this time around, all should take a beating in terms of valuations, as far as the stock is concerned,
Yeah. That's
which
true.
I don't know if after rising 12x, a 30% fall is enough. It seems too less,
Yeah,
given that the earlier valuations were superior because of these reasons, right? Because it was the largest, because it had government
yeah,
support. And if you remove for these factors, clearly the valuations should come off, at least
yeah,
from the 4 times peg that it was trading at.
yeah.
How much growth and PE was it?
I think growth in P at that time, growth in P or growth in EPS?
No, I mean like what the PE is and what the growth in
Oh,
EPS is. So the differential between the two.
so EPS I think grew at about a 29%, and
Yeah,
PE numbers also fluctuated heavily around the time.
sure, but
At,
average.
let's say, yeah, average, yeah, it hit levels of 188,
Wow.
170 times PE, yeah, forward PE. And then it also
Yeah,
hit lows
but
of 5 and 6.
no, that was the beginning, right? That was when the story
Of
had
course.
just begun. Yeah.
Yeah,
So, but obviously, like right now as well, the stock is pretty expensive given the fact that
yeah,
um, growth will come off, right? There is no
right,
capacity to add. So, they will continue growing at market rate or even stagnate in terms of volume growth, at least for a year or two.
yeah,
So, clearly, uh, that yet needs to come into the numbers. But that said, I think on one side, while we say that valuations need to come off, and that price could be further under pressure because of all these issues, on the other hand, uh, the truth continues that the solar market is going to be as lucrative as it is right now, right?
yeah,
Um, with the government planning to add capacity and make it 3x, and with
yeah,
demand still exceeding supply even after so much capacity addition, it's obviously a market where um, this company can continue doing well. It's
yeah.
just that the price has to be right.
That's true.
So when would you buy it,
So,
Ayush?
so let's say right now it's trading at about a 530, 540 rupees. I see at least 16 to 20% more downside
16 to 20
afterward.
ऐसे मतलब
60.
specific.
Very specific. Yeah, but I see definitely there's equivalent downside to as much it has fallen right now. Maybe not at that quantum, but yeah, let's say around 400, 420 levels.
So no. So basically, obviously, I think the way to look at valuations is that 4 times peg ratio is obviously too expensive. Um,
Yeah,
and given industry tailwinds, etc., a peg of greater than one can be justified because there is visibility, there is high growth, there is whatever, right? So there
and
is
they're still
potential
market
for,
leaders.
yeah, even despite market share loss, they'll still end up at a 40 to 50% market share by 2027.
Exactly.
So that's still there. And they'll continue growing at 20% or 30% or whatever. So, given all that, it can command a price to earnings growth ratio of greater than one. But probably
Yeah,
in the interim, it can go from the current 4 times to lower, right? So between one
yeah,
time and 4 times. And I think those are opportunities that the stock could present, those falls, because despite
yeah,
those falls, the market is there, and despite those falls, there is enough of tailwinds for the company to perform well. But
absolutely.
that's when probably there'll be an alignment of how good the company is and how good the stock is, which is not the case
Right.
right now.
That is true.
But
And I don't
interestingly, even
think,
Asahi and
yeah, yeah,
Triveni are
exactly.
listed.
Yeah. But there, I don't, I mean, as you mentioned already, we've looked into these two, I think, also in the week of our rigorous reading about the solar competitors. Triveni doesn't seem like quite the competition. And Asahi, I think, is mainly focusing on its automotive segment than anything else.
Yeah. So even like with the capacity addition, solar will only contribute to
Yeah.
about 10% of revenue by FY27. Right.
Yeah.
So it may definitely be in a good space and it may add to incremental revenue, but it's not going to be the needle mover
Yeah.
when it comes to Asahi. Um, and for
Absolutely.
Triveni with zero revenue, Triveni Glass with zero revenue, listed on BSE,
Yeah.
don't search on NSE. With zero revenue, anything is an upside, but it's got some serious issues. with its
Oh
auditors
God.
highlighting discrepancies in their accounting, and their
Exactly.
company secretary and compliance officers leaving right after that. So I'm not entirely sure uh, whether one should play Triveni Glass given this sketchy
Yeah.
nature of the company. Uh,
Of course, this
but
is all in line with
but
what SEBI
from
asked us to do.
नो बट फ्रॉम जीरो, अगर भाव चल 1 रुपया 2 रुपया हो गया तो और कितना नीचे जाएगा ना.
Oh God. How can they report zero revenues in 2 whole years?
That's okay. How can they do a fraud with zero revenue is the question to ask.
Oh God.
I'll give you 0 rupees, Ayush, and then your from there, how will you create that is art, okay?
Fraud is an art. Should get that printed on a t-shirt.
So conclusion being,
Conclusion being, despite all the, as you said, trashing we've done on Borosil, it's not a bad company. They've done the right things, but they've, I think, faced some hurdles of their own in between. But that
the
realignment will
only
happen.
the
They'll
right
still,
thing they've done is putting capacity in the first place in
yeah,
2010.
yeah, and
उसके बाद
putting it
कुछ
early.
बराबर
Yeah,
की आ रही
that's
है.
quite, yeah. I think they've done some world-changing stuff in solar glass, although it doesn't sound as interesting or cool. World-changing things in solar glass, I'm sure it's bound to account for something. Yeah, so the
Like,
company is good. Like, so one thing they did was they removed antimony from the solar glass, so that bit of the solar glass was hazardous to the installation team. Now that's out of the
wow.
equation. And as we mentioned earlier, now the usual weight of solar glass for each panel is about 20 kilos. They're bringing that down by making the glass 2 millimeters thick, and that's something that the world wants from Borosil because they patented that technology. So there's a
Oh,
lot of, like, they're very known in
wow.
that space.
That sounds interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So does it mean that if they reduce the thickness of the glass from 4 to 2 there'll be
Yeah.
natural capacity addition without incurring capex?
No, I think the mechanism or the
Yeah,
whatever machine that's used, yeah, it's different now.
yeah.
Yeah, they can't be like, चलिए 3.2 वाला only में काट के दे दो.
तो अभी डबल ग्लास बनेगा एक एक इसमें.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, good company, but stock thoda will need some wait and
So
watching.
basically, I think conclusion is only that despite such a good opportunity being in front of our eyes in the solar space,
Yeah,
at least in the solar glass manufacturing aspect, there is absolutely nothing to play right now.
yeah,
Which is quite a sad situation, right? Because you've got so much, yeah, you've got growth and money happening in front of you, but you can't make
yeah.
money out of it. Um,
It's quite
unless
painful to
Borosil comes
watch.
down to a level which is viable or attractive
Yeah,
enough for investors to get in, um,
right.
or Triveni Glass suddenly becomes like a very clean company and as transparent as glass is supposed to be.
And
And
when pigs fly, and when unicorns exist.
and or if Asahi becomes super aggressive in solar glass, and
Yeah,
not even that, if its solar glass capacity addition is accompanied by an upcycle or a structural story in its automotive glass manufacturing business,
yeah.
then you've got
Then
to
it
play.
proves to be a good story. Yeah,
But then that's an auto
yeah,
play, that's not a solar play. so
yeah, yeah.
so yeah, we can kick it
I don't
out
think it's
now.
there yet to be termed a solar play as yet.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So cool. Podcast 10, Gyan Bato, no money to be made.
Yeah. Oops. Bye.
What a chop.
After all this.
Yeah. But it's
Yeah.
okay. People are dropping off not after 30 minutes of listening to us. It's a
No, no,
fraction
no,
of
no.
that.
10, 10. I think that's what YouTube tells us. People are listening till the 10th
Don't
minute and
lie.
then. No. Watch out for the 10th minute.
We'll start dropping promos at 20 minutes and 30 minutes.
Yeah, yeah. So that people actually watch till then. Incentivize this shit.
They'll just skip to 20. So what are we
Okay,
doing next
interesting
week?
story though. Next week will be
Another high
guns and
growth
missiles and
industry.
submarines. Yeah, weapons.
Yeah, let's go to war. If you had like, Chal, this is a good question I have. Uh, if you had all the power to decide, you've got all the missiles and aircrafts and tanks and everything. Okay? You've got all the ammo,
Okay.
arms and ammo. Um, if you were given the option to blow up one country right now, which country would that be?
Oh God, any answer is the wrong answer here. Yeah, so on that very violent note,
Next week's, yeah,
next week
we've got
is,
defense.
yeah, let's see how that pans out. I'm sure there'll be some money to be made there.
Are you supporting war?
I'm all about the technology.
No, but it's made a lot of money. Like all the defense stocks have made like
Yeah,
at least 2x returns in the last 1 year. Um,
yeah,
and there seems to be continued runway for growth, given that
yeah,
there is threat, and as long as humans are humans, they will fight.
that is true.
Cool.
Cool.
So until next time.
Yes, and that's a wrap.